Hola, ¿qué tal? Soy Matías Rebolledo y seguimos aquí en la Seminci, en lo que ya es la 69 edición de la Semana Internacional del Cine de Valladolid. Hoy seguimos ampliando nuestro espectro, dando a entender lo grande que es el festival. Hoy tenemos a Alexander Horwath, director de Henry Fonda For President. Sorry. How are you doing today?
Wonderful. It's a beautiful place, and every day has been very nice to me.
Is this your first time in Valladolid?
Yes, it is.
Oh, wow.
It's my first film, my first time in Valladolid.
So let's dive into that. How was the idea for the film born? How did you come up with it?
Well, I did not plan to become a filmmaker. I have spent my career in film culture. I ran the Vienna Film Festival and the Austrian Film Museum, and I wrote about cinema and I teach cinema. And the producer, old friend who had become a producer, told me some years ago, you have to make a film, you know so much about film history, don't you want to deal with cinema as a subject? And I said, no, there are too many other film people who know this, who do this all the time. Why should I suddenly become a filmmaker? And I pushed her back, and at the end I said, well, I think the only subject you could interest me in is Henry Fonda and America, because I thought this is a topic. I had been interested in this actor for a long time, already as a teenager, and then also later. And I've been in America many, many times, and had known a bit about the history of the nation. And I had realized, because I also made a retrospective about this actor, that he is a unique case where you can tell the story of America through this man, both through the actual biography of him and his family and his forefathers who came to America in 1651, but also through his roles. The persona of Henry Fonda is as important to me as the factual person who lived. And I realized that I can think of no other actor where important moments and aspects of American society and American history can be told through and with this man as my pilot, as I called it. Henry Fonda will be the pilot of my searching into the history of America. And I thought, okay, this may be a subject where there are not 50 other people who can easily make an interesting film like that. Maybe this is a subject that has waited for me. So I told this producer friend, so if you manage to get a little bit of financing together, that may be something where I dare. It's really a question of daring to, I'm in my late 50s, so to dare to become a filmmaker at a late stage, it's tricky. And I thought, oh, I can only fail, I will fail. Why should I be able to make an interesting film? But step by step, she convinced me that I would be able, and we got everything together as an Austrian-German co-production. And I did it, and I was quite relieved and happy that it turned out to be more interesting than I had ever hoped for. People seem to like it a lot everywhere.
Speaking about interesting things, the movie deals with this premise that talks about Henry Fonda being alive for so-called 325 years alongside his characters. But I wanted to ask you about, besides the historical character of Henry Fonda, why him? Why did you feel attracted to him?
That in the beginning of my film, there is a kind of prologue where I try to explain or try to demonstrate my personal attachment to him, because it was during a trip to Paris, my first trip to a foreign country at age 15 with my parents. We spent 3 weeks there, and almost every day we also went to the movies because my parents liked cinema also, and because Paris has such a rich film scene, we saw 3 Henry Fonda films during that stay in Paris, and I was fascinated. I had already been fascinated by his daughter Jane from watching some of her films in the late 70s, and then I saw these films with him, and it was important films, and it's like psychoanalysis, one cannot really analyze oneself, but I think some of the aspects of this actor, who was never triumphalist, he was never the strong, virile, heroic
He's
type.
an anti-John Wayne in a way.
In a way, yes. And he was a reflective person. As I found out, he was also a reflective person in real life, but his acting style is very minimal almost compared to some other Hollywood stars who are very expressive. And Fonda is a well-trained actor and a very virtuoso actor without showing himself to be a virtuoso. You know, he's also in a way the opposite of Brando or Laurence Olivier. He's very withdrawn. He works with minimal means, and he's a skeptic. That's the word that I think fits him best. And I guess I have similar, you know, traits. I would always question something before saying, this is like that. This is the truth. I know the truth. I have the truth. I know that America is the greatest nation in the world. All these kinds of statements are very foreign to me, and they were also foreign to Fonda. And I believe that I saw in him a type that is quite uncommon for Americans, at least the cliche of Americans. So when I came back, I saw more films. I wrote a little in school. At 17, I wrote in English literature. I wrote a paper in school about him. But then also for many years, I did not think about Henry Fonda. You know, I began to be a critic and a curator and so on. But when I stopped my work at the Film Museum, at the Austrian Film Museum in 2017, one of the topics that I ended my long time there was already called that, Henry Fonda for President. It was a selection of 25 of his films. And so that was, in the moment when this producer friend asked me, you should be a filmmaker, you should be... I had him in my mind, you know, he was on my mind because I had just the year before, I had made this retrospective and I had read a lot about him, and I had understood that my intuition was really true, that because of his forefathers, because of the roles, because of his personality, he crosses, if it's a line, you know, if Henry Fonda's lives, fictional and factual lives, are a line like this, and the history of America and the important aspects of American history are another line, I simply found that there are so many ways where they intersect. Yeah? And this became, you know, I picked maybe 15 moments in time, years, places, and it's a silly and stupid idea to say one can tell the history of America, even in a 3-hour film. So you have to be selective. You have to choose moments and places and what we call satellite characters. So in the film I talk about different kinds of people who actually lived. Early feminist writer Margaret Fuller, a reactionary general in the Cold War, Curtis LeMay, and a gunfighter, a mythical gunfighter, Wyatt Earp, and so on. So with these satellite characters, these places, these moments in time, all connected in some way to Fonda and Fonda's persona, I thought I could create this. I called it a double helix. You know, it's the Fonda line and the America line. They go two spirals that go somewhere. So since it's an essay film, it's really, I treated it as it's much richer than any written essay can be. But I come from writing, so I thought the essay film as a very important genre or type of documentary film, that's the form that's waiting for me, because I knew my voice, my reflection would also play an important part.
I know that the whole film is trying to answer this, but in a way. But what would you think that Henry Fonda would think of today's America? Because we are seeing the movie barely 2 weeks before the most important election maybe in this century in America. So I wanted to ask you about that.
Well, it's of course.
Don't forget the mic.
Fonda died 42 years ago, and in his late years, as you can hear in my film, he spoke about Nixon and Reagan, and he hated both really deeply, even though Reagan was a Hollywood colleague, and he had a normal relationship and acquaintance, but he just hated their politics. So Fonda was a left liberal all his life, and he Sometimes he campaigned for candidates of the Democratic Party. He was friends with Kennedy, and he, even as a young man, he supported Franklin D. Roosevelt and took part in certain activities. But he, and that's in a way the irony of my title, he himself would never think himself able to fulfill a political job. You know, he people thought, they dreamed of campaigns that Henry Fonda should be our president. We need someone like him. But he was such a shy and withdrawn person. He said, as opposed to my daughter, who is a great activist, Jane Fonda, you know, she appears in public and she stands for her causes and what she believes in. He will say what he believes in an interview, but he would never be able to go on a stage as himself. He can go on any stage playing another character, but he cannot go on stage as himself and be a political candidate. To your question, it's hard to imagine what he would think this is a dystopian science fiction situation that he finds himself in. I don't think people of his generation would, not only him, but also those who were Republican voters, like his close friend James Stewart, would not think that a figure like Trump and the climate and a media political circus, the way it looks today, could exist in not so not in the 27th century, but just 50 years after the 70s or so. So it's hard to. I think he would. He says he has to puke. He has to throw up when he hears a Reagan speech. I think he would slit his throat or Trump's throat. Maybe he would become a political assassin. I don't know. It's so that your question makes clear how far we have come. And of course there are progressive and productive forces also in American politics. My view of America is not one-sided. I know America and Americans too well to know that it's always an ambivalent situation. But the extremism to which the Trump presidency we already had and these campaigns now have led is it's hard to, since it happens, since certain forms of these kinds of politics also happen in to a certain degree in European countries, maybe we have to get used to the fact that what we understood as politics, thinking of what is best for the common good, you know, trying to find a consensus between different convictions, this job, a very it has to be a trustworthy person to fulfill these kinds of jobs. That's in the past. You know, we won't have that anymore in politics, and that's a shame and a horror. And I'm a bit fearful for the near future.
Well, since Henry Fonda passed away, and that kind of manner to understand politics also passed away, I wanted to ask you: there is someone in the actual landscape that you can like compare to him, an actor?
I mean, I could start now naming names, but I think one important difference is the role of cinema.
Okay.
I mean, you're a movie magazine, so this may sound sad to you, but I think that period in which Henry Fonda was alive and active from the 1930s to the early 1980s was an era in which the cinema played an absolutely dominant role next to radio. Of course, television then came in and became more important, but in general, the cinema played an enormous part in the public imagination, in public discourse, in what Norman Mailer called the dream life, and I use that term in the film. So for people to act as citizens in a political dimension and to be moviegoers, to see films and to understand America, to understand the way we live through cinema, this was so close together that you could as an actor, drawing so much imaginative attention from your audience, they projected everything onto their big stars. You know, the cinema is no longer in that position. For better or worse, you know, the cinema still produces great works. There's no question about it, but centrality of cinema for public life is gone. Even if we have still millions of people going to see Marvel Universe films and other films, it's been replaced by other things. First by television, and now we live in a world in which the social media and the kinds of rhetoric, the kinds of discourse, the images and the imaginary that is being created by social media is the equivalent. It's not the same, but it's the equivalent in terms of its important role for public life. It's the equivalent of what cinema and radio were in the mid 20th century. Totally. So in that sense, no actor, as famous as he may be, could ever play, I think, the role in public imagination that people like John Wayne or Fonda or others played in the 20th century. George Clooney would be a logical figure because he's also a left liberal. He even he created a remake of Failsafe, one of Fonda's greatest films. And he's a politically outspoken person, and he helps good causes, etc. And he's a very handsome guy, like Fonda was a very handsome guy, who tries to play, to function in different genres. But actually, I could not say that. It mainly has to do with the fact that the cinema is elsewhere now, and Trump is a media creation too. You know, Trump is the creation of a TV show, The Apprentice, and of other media forms. So we have a media figure. Reagan was the last possible candidate of the classical Hollywood era, and he became president and was there for 8 years. With Reagan, also that role of cinema ended, and now it's Trump, typically a product of a different media constellation, is what we get.
First an actor, now a wrestler. Alexander, thank you so much for your time, and let's hope the best for the film.
Thank you very much for the interview.
A todos los demás, muchísimas gracias por seguirnos siempre en quinótico.es, donde tenéis toda la información de esta Semana Internacional del Cine de Valladolid. Ya sabéis, quinótico.es, la primera con K, la segunda con C.